How you doing, guys? This is Yusuf Justin Holcroft. Everybody calls me Justin. And welcome to Marshall Music, who've really kindly invited me to come along and do a couple of things about woodwinds, things particularly about the saxophone. Now, I've been in the industry a few years. I've been in South Africa since 2004. And in the time between then and now, I've played with most of the people that you probably have heard of in South Africa, and I do a lot of session work. I do a lot of live gigs. I'm with bands like Swing City, the Johannesburg Big Band. I've got my own quintet, and I've played with, as I say, quite a few people. And I also spent a couple of years teaching jazz saxophone at Wits, and having been in the industry for a few years, I've sort of seen things that go on in South Africa where I'm thinking to myself, we haven't got any local content. There are brilliant saxophone tutorial videos on YouTube which will tell you absolutely everything, and they're all done in this absolutely wonderful American accent, which is great. So what we've been thinking here at Marshall Music, who invited me here, we've been thinking, let's get some local content from local musicians who can actually speak the language that we understand and talk about things that are particular to the South African music industry and South African woodwind players in this case in particular. So I'm going to deal with a couple of the basics which you may think don't need to be talked about, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to talk about a couple of more complicated things around jazz phrasing and around what our job is as musicians, and I'm going to talk generally about saxophones, about mouthpieces, and about all kinds of stuff around those instruments. I've been playing the saxophone for 41 years this year, and before I came to South Africa I grew up in the UK and did a lot of session work in the UK and played in a lot of bands in the UK until I finished varsity and left and went to live in Austria. Did a load of bands in Austria and played with some really good people in Austria. Moved down here in 2004, and I say I've been on the scene ever since. So, the saxophone. It's an absolutely amazing instrument. And the thing about the thing that I've always found fascinating about the saxophone is you can get going on the sax relatively quickly and relatively easily. It's quite an easy instrument to pick up and start making your way on. And within a few weeks you can start putting phrases together and you can start sounding halfway decent. The difficulty with the saxophone is when it comes to taking it to that next level, which is to make it your voice. Now let's think about what I mean by that. Woodwind instruments in general, so sax, clarinet, oboe, cor anglais, bassoon, and so on and so on. Woodwind instruments in general are actually unique in that they are the only musical instruments that fit inside your body. Now some people, when they play, it sounds as though they've inserted... No, I'm not going to go there. The point about the saxophone particularly is it fits inside your body, and it therefore sort of should become a part of you, and certainly should be able to be your voice. So when you're on stage, unless you are particularly adept at singing, and most of us, let's face it, aren't, you need the saxophone to be your voice on stage. And as such, we don't talk. When we talk, we don't talk in a monotone. We don't talk just flat like this all the time using the same phrasing and the same level and the same speed. We don't talk like that because that would be really boring. What we do is we raise our voice so we can talk loud, or we bring our voice down to get people's attention, or we can speak faster, or we can speak slower to emphasize things. We can go up, we can go down, we can go all over. A huge range within our voice. Theoretically, the saxophone should be able to do that for you. So if it isn't doing that for you, then there may be something that we can do about it. And it's all to do with the bit where the saxophone connects to your body, which is what we call your embouchure, which is the way your mouth forms around your mouthpiece. Now we're going to talk in this video about the basics of embouchure, because I've seen a lot of players in this country where quite obviously right at the beginning of their learning the saxophone, nobody has told them of the importance of the embouchure. The result being that you will see them on stage or playing away and the saxophone will be going like that in their mouths, which means that there is no stable connection between their body and the saxophone, which means that their voice is not under control. Now, that's something where I look at it and say to myself, the end result of that is going to be you fighting your sax the whole time. And I promise you, if there's one thing I've learned in 41 years of playing, if you start fighting this instrument, it will win every time. So what we've got to try and do is get some kind of stability so that the embouchure is a stable interface between you and your saxophone, meaning that there's no distortion in your voice, that your voice is able to sing through the horn. I'll show you what I mean. So if you just watch as I play, what you'll notice is, number one, that I spit a lot. Number two, that the saxophone is not going to move, and the embouchure, so my lips around the mouthpiece, are going to be very, very stable, and you shouldn't see too much movement. So what you'll notice is there may be a bit of up and down movement, which is the way I control how much lip is on my reed, which allows me to play lower down the instrument or higher up the instrument. There will be some variation in the pressure I'm putting on the reed, but side to side, almost no movement whatsoever. So you've got a straight line between where the air is coming from, which is here, right up through your windpipe, through your trachea, and straight down the saxophone. So it should be as straight a line as possible. And you think about it, it sort of makes sense, because you want a solid, straight wind tunnel coming up from here right down your saxophone. Any side-to-side movement will just deflect the wind, and the wind will get turbulence, will develop vortices, as a result of which the sound isn't going to be as pure. So it's not going to work as well. So the straighter the wind tunnel, the better your sound is going to be, and the better your projection is going to be. Therefore, the better you're going to be able to use your voice. So hugely, hugely important that these muscles here are forming a really tight seal, as is your top lip, and the pressure on the reed comes in the middle of the reed, right from the middle of your lip, and that's all that it's about. So no side-to-side movement, just straight, straight, straight. And keep it like that so the saxophone isn't waving around. Now, I know when we're on stage, what happens is we want to put a show on and we want to wave the saxophone all over the place. You can do. The problem is your head's got to move with it. So, and you notice that when the saxophone moves over there, my head's got to move with it. So I'm trying to keep as straight a tunnel of air, as straight a flow of air through the sax from my mouth and from my diaphragm as possible all the time. Now, that's the basics of embouchure. Now, if you're doing it right, what you will notice is that your muscles here and your muscles here in your bottom lip are really going to take strain, particularly if you've been doing it wrong up until now and you're now just starting to get into doing it right. You'll probably be taking a lot of strain around your mouth. Here's something you can do, and it's going to be a bit bizarre. Here's something you can do if you want to train those muscles, and it's something that you don't even need a saxophone to do. I have in my hand a nice normal teaspoon, and what you can do whenever you want to is you can take that teaspoon by the handle end and you can put it between your top lip and your bottom lip without it touching your teeth, and you can walk around the house holding it parallel to the ground like that. And if you can do that for 10 minutes, you're going to know that your mouth has got something stuck into it, because it's going to start hurting. This is the brilliantly, brilliantly, brilliantly easy way to train your embouchure and get exactly the right muscles working, that need to be working and need to be strong to get your embouchure as stable as possible. So, I'm going to go again, and you can actually talk, and if you're able to talk, you're probably... Don't try talking, it doesn't work. If you want to do that, do it for 10-15 minutes a day, every day, and within 2 weeks, I promise you, you will feel a difference, and your embouchure will thank you for it. Your sax playing will thank you for it. Now, what the embouchure means is that we can then, once we've got our voice stable, we can then start using our voice in different ways. So we don't need to just play one way. The basic sound is going to stay exactly the same. There's going to be no change in the basic timbre of the sound. What you can do though is vary the nuances of that sound. So you can go from, if you're on tenor sax, you can go from this with lots and lots of breath in it, but it's exactly the same embouchure and it's a very stable embouchure. Or you can go into the light and airy and fast and nimble. Basically the same embouchure, but you're really, really light and nimble and not using any of the breath at all. Or you can go really in your face. You can then do anything in between. So you can do pretty much whatever you want, as we do with our voice. So our voice doesn't just stay at the same volume all the time. You can really start shouting at people if you want to, or you can go really quiet if you want to. The same should be possible with the saxophone. But it's only going to be possible if your embouchure is doing what you want it to do, and if the saxophone is under control, because your embouchure is under control. So, little exercise you might want to try for yourself is whether you can go from pianissimo to fortissimo and whether you can do it across the whole range of the instrument. That is a pretty sure sign that you've got the instrument under control, which means that your embouchure is under control. So, that's a pretty sure sign that your embouchure is pretty much sorted. Now, there are embouchures which people have put forward as being a good viable alternative, particularly in the States, particularly in the 80s. It's called the double lip embouchure, and it sort of suits itself to people who like to have less pressure on their mouthpiece, and that's fine. That's up to you, as long as it's under control. Now, the way the double lip embouchure works, and I'm not going to be able to do it properly because it's not my favorite embouchure, is where you actually have no teeth pressure on your mouthpiece at all. So, basics of a normal embouchure, single lip embouchure, is you bite at the top and you curl your lip round the reed at the bottom. The double lip embouchure says you don't bite at the top. So you take a lot more mouthpiece into your mouth, like that, and keep your lips relatively fluid, but forming a seal around the mouthpiece. The danger with that is taking so much mouthpiece into your mouth that you're going to get a really raucous sound. If you get down to the bottom of the instrument, very easy to make it sound like a foghorn. And you're going to have difficulty tuning, because as you know, we tune by tightening up or loosening our embouchure. The way, this is where the double lip embouchure actually is a lot more complicated than it seems. Because the way double lip embouchure players tune is by opening and closing their throat cavity. Now, if you've never tried this, Try burping while you're playing the saxophone, and what you'll find is the note will go and it'll dip down because your throat cavity is opening up. And you can actually do this, and I'll demonstrate how much of a range in tuning you can achieve by just opening your throat cavity. So all I'm going to do, I'm not going to change embouchure at all. I'm going to play with a normal embouchure, and all I'm going to do is just open my throat a bit and show you what happens to the note. So I can get about a semitone's worth of variance downwards from any note just by opening my throat up. Is it nice? I don't think so, because what happens as soon as you start loosening off your embouchure and opening up your throat, the tonal quality tends to disappear, and you tend to just lose focus of the sound. So I don't particularly like it, but that's the way to control your tuning if you're using a double lip embouchure. My advice, stick to the normal one, but that's just my advice. It's completely up to you. However, there are certain things that you need to do, whatever embouchure you're using, as long as it's a stable embouchure, a couple of things that we need to be thinking of around how to actually control your instrument with a stable embouchure. So, those of you who've been playing a bit will have worked it out. As you go further down the instrument, you're going to need to loosen off your embouchure to make sure that the reed is still able to vibrate, because the frequency of the vibration is going to go down as you go down the instrument. So, another thing that you might find you need to do is, if you just loosen off your embouchure going down the instrument, you might find it ends up sounding like a foghorn. How do you play quiet at the bottom of the instrument? Fairly loose embouchure, but what you've also got to think of doing is taking your bottom jaw backwards into your head like this. And what you're doing is you're actually allowing less of the reed, so just more of the tip of the reed to vibrate while keeping the embouchure loose. So and it's not easy, and all I'm doing is that kind of movement, putting my jaw back into my head. Don't try this without a saxophone in your mouth, because you'll look bloody ridiculous. But that's the way to get control of lower volumes right down at the bottom of the instrument. That's the only way to do it. As you get up the instrument, you are going to be tightening up your embouchure, putting more pressure with the middle of your bottom lip onto there. And that should be a noticeable process. So as you go up the instrument, you should be able to feel your lower jaw tightening up and putting more pressure on the reed. And what you can actually even feel yourself doing is slightly raising your head and angling the sax down as you get up to the top of the instrument. And that just automatically puts more pressure on the reed, which means that you're more stable at the top of the instrument. Now that's the natural top of the instrument, top F sharp. If you've got your embouchure really under control, and particularly if you've got this variable pressure under control of the middle of your bottom lip on the middle of the reed, you can actually do fun things beyond the range of the saxophone. So you can do you notice I wasn't moving my fingers after the first bit. I kickstart it by waggling my fingers around. The rest is all embouchure, and it's all varying the pressure on the reed. Right, there's a load of technical stuff in there, and I don't want to bore you, and I probably have already. So if you've turned off, brilliant, I'll see you next video. But ask yourself the question, is my embouchure under control? And more to the point, am I getting my embouchure under control enough for me to have my instrument under control, or am I fighting my instrument? If you feel at any point you're fighting the instrument, sorry, it's probably you. And it's all to do with your embouchure. It probably isn't the instrument, it probably is your embouchure. And the more you work on a solid, really stable embouchure, the more under control your instrument will be. As soon as your instrument gets under control, that is the point at which it can turn into your voice. That's pretty much all I wanted to tell you. Don't forget about the teaspoon. Great, great, great exercise to firm up your muscles. And once again, thank you to Marshall Music for inviting me here. I'm going to be putting a few more videos out dealing with various other aspects. If this has been of some kind of interest, feel free to get in touch. We'll post a link and come at me with questions. Anything you need to know, I'll be more than happy to help. But once again, thank you to Marshall Music for getting me in here, and we'll see you again in the next video. Thank you.